Well, I'll do this kind of informally today and try and talk quickly and not hop around the stage too much. Not fall down. So I'm going to talk about, give you a quick introduction to PopCap, and then I'm going to sort of just tell a couple of stories about what it's been like for PopCap's now 11-year history, which is kind of crazy. We still feel like a startup in a lot of ways, but now that we're part of an 8,000-person company, it's not quite the same. But along the way, I sort of pick out some of my favorite stories of things that I've learned from running the company, and hopefully you'll listen to them, nod sagely, and probably forget about them soon afterwards until you have to learn them again yourself. But so PopCap, I've done probably a zillion presentations about PopCap, and I pretty much always start with a slide like this that talks about the games. We are a product-driven company through and through. The games are the most important things that we do. We're not a customer-driven company. We're not a marketing-driven company. We're not a sales-driven company. We make games. We make them for everybody. You can play them anywhere, alone or with your friends. Some of our best-known brands are sitting up there on the screen. Bejeweled, Plants vs. Zombies are the two that you probably would have heard of. And that's what's really gotten our company to go from, as Christina said, 20 people to, I think we're getting close to 600 now. Our goal really has been to create the most popular game franchises in the world. And notice I don't have the word video game franchises up there. I say game franchises. We're really trying to unseat Monopoly and Scrabble as sort of the games that people think of at the top of mind. It's a pretty ambitious goal, and I'm not sure we'll ever be able to do that, but we really were trying now, and that's sort of what we've been striving for, and again, it always stems from the games. So if you look at our first 10 years, we started with about 5 people and a bunch of small games that you probably never heard of. We had nobody playing them. We had no revenue. A decade later, we had 500 people in the company. This would be the end of 2010. Dozens of games, half a billion players, and more than $100 million in revenue. So it's been a great ride. Our business sort of goes in 4 different chunks. So we have a desktop business where people play PC games, whether they play them directly sort of as client games or on the Mac or the PC. We have an online business that's largely driven by Facebook these days. Mobile business, largely driven by iPhone these days, and a console business, which is Xbox, PS3, et cetera. About 80% of the games we sell are distributed digitally, although 20% of our stuff goes through old-fashioned retailers like Walmart, and we love those guys. Geographically, we are mostly here in Seattle. About half our staff is here. We have a small studio up in Vancouver, a small studio down in San Francisco. In Europe, our headquarters are in Dublin. We got about 80 or 85 people there right now where they make games. And they also run sales and marketing for the European region. And then in Asia, we have about 100 people now in Shanghai. I was actually just there last week. And we make games in Asia for Asia. We have a small office in Tokyo and a small office in Seoul. So that's kind of where we are geographically. So, you know, this is sort of a truism that I'll impart many truisms on you today that you can believe or not. Good, lucky, and smart. It's always important that you have at least 2 of those, but 3 is better. In fact, I'd pretty much say you have to have 3. It's funny, actually, go back to that. There was an article, Jim Collins, who wrote the book From Good to Great, sort of the popular business press, has got another book out where he talks about return on luck. It's actually an interesting concept. There was an op-ed piece in the New York Times, I think last Sunday or a week and a half ago, and actually resonated quite well with me because I've been talking about luck as a factor in what we do a lot. I think that it's really important that you be lucky, but Jim's sort of take in this article, and probably his book, which I haven't read, his new book, was that luck is always a factor in your business, good luck or bad luck, and the most successful companies actually take advantage of the luck, whether it's good or bad. And I think that's really an important concept, is that do you take advantage of the good luck and the bad luck to actually do something with it, to ride something with it, to make something more of it? And so luck, I believe, is a huge factor. It certainly has been for us at PopCap. In fact, when I do this slide that talks about sort of how we've come over time, we started out with great games, and I keep harping on that when we talk about PopCap. But really, over the last few years, there were some market enablers, and this is where luck comes in. So, you know, the good part was starting with, does this work? It doesn't work. The good part was starting with great games. The lucky and the smart part comes over here in the market enablers. What really happened for us over the last few years is we got lucky with where the market went. In particular, we saw better devices that allowed people to play games in places they never could play before. Leading the sort of the pack on that was the iPhone. That ties in with better stores. The iPhone really changed the way gaming worked forever. So we'd been trying to get sort of everybody to play games. You know, our target demographic is pretty much anyone who breathes. Most of our customers are women. Most of our customers are over 30. People have a hard time believing that. I didn't believe it when I started. It's actually true. But when you see devices like the iPhone come out, it actually allows people to play games that they couldn't play before. The other sort of lucky thing that happened for us was Facebook, playing with friends. That has just changed the landscape of gaming forever. You see companies like Zynga that have come on strong from zero to a multi-billion-dollar valuation in just a couple of years. Taken companies like Activision Electronic Arts, the big mainstays in this business, by surprise, I think, to a certain extent. So it's been great, but really all those things conspired to make PopCap a successful company. So I'm going to go back in time, tell you some little stories about PopCap. So 2000, this is Internet 1.0 is when PopCap was founded. There were 3 founders. They actually all still work for the company. There wasn't quite 3 guys in a garage. It was 2 guys in a rented apartment and 1 guy in Canada. John and Brian were here in Seattle. Jason was up in Canada, and they decided to start a company making games. They were going to take advantage of the new internet craze, and they were going to sell Java games to the big portals. The big portal's entire business model in early 2000 was eyeballs. We all remember that, right? Eyeballs. It was all about eyeballs. People paid for eyeballs. And so they thought, well, we'll sell them these little games, and then they'll be able to keep more eyeballs on their pages, and then therefore they'll have a nice little business to sell more advertising. That all sounded good, except that wasn't quite how they got started. The actual company started out being called Sexy Action Cool. Sexy Action Cool. So when I started PopCap in 2005, our payroll statements still said Sexy Action Cool. Imagine people applying for their mortgages. I work for an internet company called Sexy Action Cool. The first product, and there's some debate internally about whether all 3 of the founders worked on this or just John and Jason, was actually called Foxy Poker. And the idea behind Foxy Poker was it was going to be a PG-13 strip poker game. So imagine sort of Austin Powers-esque strip scenes where sort of strategically placed objects covered up the naughty bits, and suddenly the strip poker wasn't quite as dirty as strip poker might be. This was not the game that made PopCap famous. I think that lasted about maybe a few weeks before it was finally done. But it proves that sometimes what you start out to do and what you end up doing are quite different. But really, just soon after that, they made a little game that eventually became Bejeweled. It was actually started out as a product called Diamond Mine. Jason never liked the name Bejeweled. Some folks at Microsoft actually came up with that name. He thought it sounded too much like a terrible Brendan Fraser movie called, I think, Bedazzled, that was playing at the time, and he thought that Diamond Mine was a much better name. Jason's not wrong very often. He was wrong about that. Bejeweled the idea was that they would make, this was the first of the many games they were going to sell to all these internet portals, so they thought they would just sell a bunch of them. So they made this game. It was done about March or April of 2000. For those of you who remember financial history, that was just right about the same time that the dot-bomb happened, and pretty much every portal site that made its living on advertising stopped making its money on advertising. They stopped making money altogether. And so these guys were stuck with this game and no one to buy it. And they literally went from place to place and said, would you please buy this game? And Microsoft said no, and Real said no, and kind of everybody said no. The famous last words from one of the large game companies was, why would I want to buy that? It's not even a game. So we've been very sensitive to that line. A lot of times people talk about some of the new entrants like Zynga as not even making games, and we like to take that a little bit more seriously. So Diamond Mine eventually became Bejeweled, and so they couldn't get any money for it. They tried, $50,000, $20,000, $30,000, $20,000, $10,000. Nobody wanted to pay anything. Finally, they got the folks at Microsoft to agree to rent it, to pay them a monthly fee. I can't remember what the number was. But so they put it up on MSN. It rapidly shot up to the top usage on MSN. It was sort of 10 times more popular than any other game on the MSN game section. And they knew they had something pretty cool, but they still had no idea how to make real money on it. I mean, they were making $1,000 a month or something for Microsoft, but that wasn't really going to pay the bills. So the time came along where they had to figure out, all right, what are we going to do to make money? And they thought, and sort of the business model at the time that really sort of became the mainstay of the casual games business was a try and buy model. They were going to make a, quote, deluxe version. The deluxe version of the game would have better sound, better graphics, and it would run disconnected from the internet. So instead of having to be connected to the web, you could download it to your computer and play it independently. The big question, of course, was how do you sell this thing? And the try and buy model was born out of this, where there was a 60-second timer, and people could try it. If they liked it, then they could unlock it and use it for free, or use it as long as they want to after that. The big question was pricing. And this was sort of a great historic moment in the casual game business that a lot of the old-timers love to talk about is the PopCap, the founders all thought, let's charge like $5 for it. Maybe $10, but $5 probably is better. And a gentleman named Howard Tomlinson, who was running a company out in the UK that made software for the Palm Pilot, was emphatic to the guys that what they had to do was charge $20 for it. And they, of course, thought this was complete lunacy. This is, who would pay $20 for something that you can actually play for free? That's insane. And Howard insisted that, I'm not sure if he used the sort of traditional marketing speak that we would use today talking about this, but pricing is positioning, and you have to set value for your products, et cetera, and you value things on the alternatives. Anyway, he badgered the guys into charging $20. And when they finally put up the first version of Bejeweled, and this story is actually true, Brian rigged up a little ka-ching cash register sound on the website, the PopCap website, and every time somebody bought it, it would do the little ka-ching, ka-ching. And within 2 days, they had to turn the ka-chings off because it wouldn't stop ka-chinging. So they were literally making so much money in the first sort of month that they were like, hey, this is awesome. The rule that the takeaway from that is if your product is good, people will actually pay for it. It's really hard to, it was hard for these guys to imagine that $20 was a good price. In today's 99-cent app world, it also seems a little bit crazy, but $20 has actually been the price that it stayed for the last decade on the PC side. And we're forever grateful to Howard Tomlinson from Astroware for coming up with a $20 price point. So fast forward to 2003, and we're going to talk about games on phones. So this is the oldest phone I could find a picture of that I could find with a screenshot of us. This is you have to remember, in 2003, all the phones were these Java Brew handsets that were kind of messy. There were no touchscreens. A lot of them were just barely color. In fact, PopCap's very first contract that John Vici ever signed, he signed in 2000 with a company called Jamdat. And they were going to make video games for mobile phones. So in 2000, that's crazy, right? These phones could barely do anything. They signed the deal. John came back and told the founders he'd gotten this $50,000 advance to get $50,000 guarantee to sell games on phones. And Jason, again, in his infinite wisdom, he's almost always right, but this time, again, not so much. He said, that's crazy. No one will ever play games on phones. They celebrated and thought what saps the guys at Jamdat were. But by 2003, the mobile phone business was going great guns, and PopCap was generating huge amounts of revenue for doing almost no work. They had licensed this product to Jamdat. Jamdat was selling it to the carriers, and it was a huge success. It was always number one and number two on all the carrier decks. And I think what the takeaway from that was that you can almost never predict what's going to happen with markets. You think you know what's going on. You read all these experts, and they tell you what's going to go on. And it very seldom evolves the way they tell you. So by 2003, everybody was on to the fact that mobile phones could be a great gaming platform. By 2004, there were probably billions of dollars of venture money being poured into the gaming market in phones, Java Brew phones. The experts were predicting this enormous growth, which also never happened. It sort of ended about there. It sort of hit its plateau before something else happened. So the experts were wrong twice on this one. One, that it would never happen. The second, that it would get bigger than it was. You don't really ever know what's going to go on. And a lot of being successful is being adaptable, is adapting yourself to whatever luck deals you during these times. And that's certainly what PopCap was doing. So 2005 is when I joined PopCap. As Christina said, that was they were about 25 people, I think, at the time. And John Vici, who was one of the founders, was about to quit again for his second time of quitting so that he could go off and make movies. And I fortunately rescued him from that a few months later. And then they hired me. I had never been in the gaming space before. I'd been sort of retired. I'd sold my company a few years before that, and I'd like to say I was between startups. and I was between startups for a long time. Found PopCap and really liked the business model, liked what those guys were doing, the business model. Calling it a business model was being generous at the time. They liked making games. They had great products. And John told me they had about $10 million in revenue, which I didn't believe. I was like, no, you don't really have $10 million in revenue, John. He's like, no, I think we do. And he's like, he wasn't quite sure either. It was kind of crazy. It was an interesting time. But actually, the founders were quite prescient in the idea that they decided that they'd actually just walked away from an acquisition offer from a large company. And they'd been offered about $40 million for PopCap, I think. Somewhere, the legend could be 40 million, it could be 70 million, but somewhere in that range. And when they were trying to hire me, I said, okay, guys, so here you're trying to hire me. What in the world do you want if you're going to walk away from that much money? Because they own the whole company. It's like, okay, that's a crap ton of money. And so we had quite a lot of discussions about sort of what it meant to sort of go from a 30-person studio, which is what they were, just a company that made games, to a full-on developer publisher, which is what sort of the ambition then became when they hired me. So it was an interesting time for us, a really sort of big transitional time for PopCap and one that was exciting. Here's the company in 2005. This is the company picnic in the summer. We put on Santa hats so that we could use it for the Christmas card, I think. That's me. Hiding with my dog. The dog is now a fixture at PopCap. She gets to come to the office every day. So the first thing that sort of came out of that, though, is that I started hiring really quickly. And the lesson that I will tell you a million times, and this is one where you will nod sagely and certainly forget about it, is always hire better people than you need. And I mean a lot better people than you need. We were a 25-person company, and I wanted to hire my first salesperson. It was a gentleman who still works for PopCap, my number 2, Dennis Ryan. And the founders were like, well, we just hired you. We don't need another business guy. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we do. And so when I brought Dennis on, it was an interesting discussion because he's a guy who had been CEO of his own company, and I wanted him to come in and sort of build a business development effort for a 30-person game company. It was almost a little crazy. But we knew that if we were going to make this thing work, I had to hire somebody who could take us 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Actually, I probably thought only 2 years down the road. But either way, I have never in my life regretted over-hiring. That is, hiring somebody more qualified for a job than the one that I was hiring for. When I hired my first attorney, sort of a general counsel a year later, it's like the founders thought I was crazy. Here we are hiring an attorney. But having a great general counsel with a great deep experience was really important in the company. Hiring an HR person who had managed 80 HR people at Washington's, I think, second largest employer seemed crazy at the time, but having someone who really knows what they're doing in those jobs is just hugely important. So I can't tell you how important it is to sort of always overhire. If you hire people who are just barely qualified for where you are today and you're a growing company, you're going to regret that a year or two later. And so this is probably the hardest thing to remember. And this is one I wish I could say I was so wise that I had heard this lesson and learned it. I learned it the hard way, as many of you either have or will certainly do at some point. So by 2006, one of our first goals of PopCap was to go global. We had 97% of our business coming out of North America, and like any good software guy, I said we have to expand outside the U.S. We quickly opened an office in Dublin. We put about 10 people there. That was a huge risk for us. Through the efforts of one of our guys, James Gortzman, we actually decided we were going to open an office in China within a year or two after that. James had actually started going to China in 2005, even though he recently had twins that were about 2 years old at the time. He was in China, in Asia, I think about 2 weeks out of every 6. His wife was very patient, and he ended up actually moving to China, starting up our Shanghai office. He's the least Chinese-looking person you'll ever meet in your life, but moved his wife and family over there, and they've been over there ever since. This is actually we finally opened the office in 2008, and James had been literally traveling over there for 2 years before that, and he had moved over there in 2007. This was the office as it sat in 2008, right, or 2009, about a year after we opened the office. Today we have 2 floors in a building in China with 100 people there. I was just there last week, as I said, and it's incredibly fun for me to sort of go to our remote locations and see how how we've tried to create PopCap, but still have it very local. So that's really what we've been doing there, and this team is really excited, and they've done some great stuff. This isn't Asian outsourcing. A lot of game companies do that. This is building games in the local markets. The gaming business is different than most in that it's really critical that you have games that adapt to the culture And there's a lot about the cultures of gaming, particularly in Asia, that are quite different from those in the US or those in the West. And so we've been quite happy with that, but it's a long investment that we've been working on. So ultimately, my lesson from that is work hard to get about half your revenue from outside North America. This is probably one of the hardest things to do when you're an entrepreneur is you get so focused on what you're doing internally that you just want to keep selling at home where you are. And sometimes that's the right thing to do for a while until you can get going. But the earlier you start investing for a global company, the sooner you'll be a better global company. And it really is critical, I think, for any company's success that you try and be global. So let's go to 2006. This was a pivotal time for us because we were doing fine as a company, and we started to think about, we had a couple more acquisition offers that we had walked away from, and we decided that we would take some outside money, not to invest in PopCap and keep it in the treasury, but in fact to give the founders some liquidity. And it's a pretty common thing these days is that a lot of venture firms will come in and say, well, let's give you some founder liquidity. It takes some risk off the table. And so this was a courting process that, for me, took probably 6 months, I think, of really working with the founders. The gentleman that I brought in as an investor at the time who bought their shares was a colleague of mine who I've known for a long time. I actually went to business school with him. And so I trusted him a lot. And so it was one of those things where his name was Larry Bowman, and Larry had been running a big hedge fund in Silicon Valley. I think he had $5 billion or something under management for a while. And so for him, this was a small investment. But it was pretty strategic for us, obviously, and it really was a big choice point, I think. So once you decide as a company that you're going to take outside money, everything's a little bit different. No matter how friendly they are, no matter how wonderful they are, suddenly you have a new party involved that has interests that may or may not be the same as the ones you would have had on your own. So, we went into this with our eyes open. The guys spent a huge amount of time with Larry. Ultimately, he wanted a board seat, and he was going to put one of his minions on the board, and Vici, to his credit, said, there's no way you're going to do that. You're going to come up here for every meeting, and you're going to be on the board yourself. And he, in fact, did do that and was a great asset on the board. So, but this was a pivotal point, because at this point now, we started to think about something that you don't really think about as an entrepreneur. You shouldn't anyway, is the exit. And not as much an exit for the company as an exit for investors, because at some point when you have their money, no matter how wonderful and long-term their horizon is a horizon. It doesn't go on forever. So outside capital will put you on a different path. It will change your company. It's not a bad thing. You just have to go into it with your eyes open and realize it's going to happen. So let's go up to 2008 now. 2008, I talked about the iPhone a minute ago. This was, like I said, just a pivotal time in PopCap's history, because the iPhone literally brought millions of new gamers into the fold. This was just crazy. Nobody ever thought one device would do this. So this is an old slide that I recently updated. So this is the iPhone top sales chart in August of 2008. It's about a month after it came out. You don't have to sort of read the names to know that you probably never heard of most of them. This is the March 2010 list. And there are 5 apps from the first list that are still in the top 200 of the second list. So that's how much turnover there had been. So only 5 of those. And most of them had dropped way below the top 25. In fact, the only one, self-serving of course, that had actually stayed in that list and stayed in the top 25 was Bejeweled. So let's fast forward. So this is the slide I'd used for a long time in some pitches I made for PopCap. A couple weeks ago, I actually updated this to include November 2011. And oddly enough, 5 apps were from this March 2010 list were still in the top 200 again. So literally, the turnover in apps has been huge. Now, for companies like PopCap, we've actually still survived. Bejeweled is still in the list. It's number 15 on this list. And to their credit, Words with Friends was in the list both times as well. So it's actually was number 20 in March 2010 and number 25 in 2011 when I made this. So the lesson here is that nobody understood what this market was going to do. Nobody ever thought it was going to be as huge as it was. And then once it became huge, everyone thought it was going to be easy. This was the pot of gold market starting in about 2008. Everybody went crazy for it. I like to say that in 2007, there was not a single company whose business plan included the iOS for gaming or for anything, really. By 2009, you couldn't trip over a business plan in Silicon Valley that didn't have the iPhone in it. People were just going crazy about it, and everyone thought there was just billions and billions of dollars to be made. But as it turned out, there was good money there, but everybody didn't get rich. And so one more time, the markets seldom evolve as you think they will, or the experts do. This was one where it caught everybody by surprise, and it never behaved the way anyone thought it would. Oddly enough, people have made the observation that the top selling lists on the iPhone look very much like the top selling lists on the Java Brew games from 10 years earlier. The dynamics are largely the same, which is really surprising. Everybody thought, oh, this is a new opportunity for little companies to shine. And sometimes it was, but for every doodle jump, there was a Bejeweled that sort of had its position in both lists. 2008, the Great Recession. This was a tough time. So in case you've forgotten what the world looked like, this is GDP. Now, I will admit this is one of those lie with statistics charts, right? So this is I've sort of stretched out the scale and stuff to exaggerate the differences, so I'm not trying to sell you anything out of it, just trying to point out that in 2008, the world started changing. That was the financial meltdown. It was a tough time. PopCap was doing great at the time. We'd had a great year, but we did something we'd never had to do before. Near the end of that year, we were looking to buy a company here in Seattle. We really liked the people. We were pretty excited about it, but the financial outlook for everything was uncertain. We didn't know what was going to happen in the new year, and we decided not to buy this company because it was going to cost us about $1 million a year, and we just weren't sure we had enough money to sustain that. And the last thing I wanted to do as the CEO was to say, let's invest in a new company, only to find myself 6 months later having to lay off people because I hadn't foreseen what would happen. So we walked away from an acquisition. Really pained us because it was always hard for us to find companies we liked and people we liked, and so this was one of the most painful times for us as a sort of a management team and a board. And we decided at that point that we were going to look for outside funding. Now, this was a terrible time to look for outside funding, so we were pretty patient about what we were going to do. But really, the idea was that we were going to finally go outside and put money in the treasury. So as I said, we had taken money from the outside before, but it was to sell the founder shares. This time we actually decided to do it for ourselves. And so the lesson here is, raise money before you need it. Now, this is the truism of business that I guarantee you have all heard before. I guarantee you will all hear it again. Corollaries to this are raise more money than you need, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is one that until you have suffered through it, you will nod sagely, but sometime in your own entrepreneurial lives, you will choose to ignore it, and then you will regret it because you'll eventually run out of money. So running out of money is not fun. I say this from experience because when I was in business school, there was a gentleman named Scott McNeely who started a company called Sun Microsystems. It was pretty hot in the valley at the time. And he sat up in front of my little class and he was saying, cash, 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 raise money, raise money. And I nodded sagely. And in my startup in 1997 or whatever, I of course thought, well, I'm different. Our product's great. We're going to make money right away. I was wrong. Raising money is painful and it's horrible, but do it before you need it, and actually do it carefully and do it considerately. Consider a lot about it. We had a great partner with Meritech, and that was made a huge difference for us. But raise capital with somebody who's actually a good match for you. Don't just take money for the sake of money. And I could go on about this for a long time, but there's probably a lot of VCs in the audience. But the truth is, they always come. What the venture capitalists want to do and what you as an entrepreneur want to do are very seldom the same thing, and you have to reconcile that. And you have to reconcile that. They can't. So you have to be the one who actually reconciles that. So let's go to 2009 again. Plants vs. Zombies. This was remember, this was the year of the financial meltdown or the year afterwards. And I think this was probably an unlikely hit. Plants vs. Zombies is kind of a crazy title. Internally, we all loved it, but we all loved every game. And so it had been in development at PopCap for 3 years. We had hired a guy down in San Francisco who had created a game for us before, and he had gone to work at Blizzard, and he quit Blizzard, and we convinced him to come work for us and to build this game. And about a year before it shipped, I had had a bike accident, stupid bike accident, and broke my collarbone. I was doing recovery at home one day, and John Vici, one of the founders, was over and just sort of keeping me company. And we played an early beta build of Plants vs. Zombies, so again, fully a year before it shipped. And we played it the whole day, and I got back to work a couple days later, and I'm like, God, we just have to ship this thing. It's ready. It's done. And George and his team were adamant that it wasn't done yet. It wasn't good enough. They were going to keep working on it. And they were right. I, the CEO, had I been sort of overstepping my boundaries, would have said, ship it and get some money now. And that would have been the wrong thing to do. Those guys waited until they got this product to the exact place they needed it. A year later, it was really right. And they made a product that literally changed the gaming landscape for us. How many of you have played Plants vs. Zombies? Quite a few? Okay, so the big debate, do you put the sunflowers in the front or the back? Sunflowers in the front? Sunflowers in the back? See, I'm a sunflowers in the front guy. Anyway, it's a long debate. It's not even funny. So anyway, this product being such a hit really reinforced our own beliefs internally that having faith that product matters. Really great products really matter. And so I can't tell you how many times I've learned this lesson. Now, I'm a product guy. There are lots of ways to build companies where great products may or may not matter. I'm not going to tell you they're right or wrong, but if you have a passion for products, I believe you can't go wrong in building a company that has a longer legacy. Again, there may be other ways to build a great company before that, but if you don't love your product, you probably should I think you should do something else. So by 2009, we finally did decide, by the end of 2009, we finally did raise some money. And I had talked to a lot of venture capitalists. We were kind of especially at this time, we were what they would call the prettiest girl on the dance floor, and had sort of all the sort of top tier venture firms were trying to talk to me, and I generally said no to most of them, which was kind of unheard of at the time, and famously pissed a few of them off. I think that they sort of speak to me now, but probably not so much as they did before. But a lot of that was because we didn't sort of find a match for us. They kind of came in pitching all these value-added services they were going to provide that we didn't actually need. We were an ongoing company that was 9 years old at this time. We were making money, and there were things that we were looking for in an investor, and it weren't always the same thing the guys were pitching. When we came across Meritech, they were a late-stage company. The guys were really smart, very helpful, and only ended up taking an observer seat on my board, but they became an instrumental part of helping the company. And so this was sort of the second stage in sort of forking the company into one that said we're actually going to do something different long term than we are in the short term, and really sort of head on a path toward an exit. And we started hiring outside board members after that, so we started actually behaving like a public company. And really at this point, it reinforced the notion that I've always had about boards, which is that your board is your responsibility. If you're going to run a company, the board doesn't happen to you. You create the board. You actually have to use it, and you have to use it responsibly, and it takes a lot of work. It's really easy as an entrepreneur to say, okay, I'm just going to get these people on the board, and it looks great when I go and talk to folks. But it takes a lot of work to actually harness their energy and use them. But I'll tell you, having outside people who can periodically look at your business with a perspective that you don't have is incredibly valuable. It's one that I was quite happy with at PopCap. I had some great board members, and you'll talk to entrepreneurs who will tell you that they don't care about this. I do, and that's my advice. 2009, I'm running out of time here, so I'll talk quickly. 2009 and started the juggernaut of Facebook. So Bejeweled Blitz was a skunkworks project for us. In the typical skunkworks of anything, there were a couple of people working by themselves. In December, they actually started this project. We launched it December 23rd, which if you've ever been in an online gaming company is the dumbest thing you can possibly ever do. Because we launched it and then everybody went away from Christmas vacation, so that was not smart. But it had incredible virality and success. So this is just the first couple of months. We went from no users at all to 160,000 people playing this game every day. This to us was phenomenal. Now we weren't making any money on it, but watching how people used the game, it was great marketing. We sort of saw this great traction. And it was only just the beginning. Because if you go to the rest of the year, it just kept going and going and going and going and going. And so that first chart I showed you is that little yellow area there, constrained in the back. So by October, less than a year later, we had 3.5 million people playing this game every single day. Now, you'll see lots of ups and downs of that. Part of that's the tournament structure we set up, including a big dip in June there, where the data center caught on fire, literally. They tell you that can't happen, right? How does that work? But learning how to run servers for 3 million people a day was a lesson that we've all got lots of scars from that. This was before cloud computing was supposed to be easy. I'm not sure it's ever easy, but we ran our own servers, and it was a lot of work for folks. And learning how to scale a business there was a lot of work. But once again, it was a great place for us to be. And once again, markets seldom evolve as you think they will. We did this as an experiment. And so it ends up that today this is probably one of our most important sources of revenue. It quickly grew. Once we started monetizing, the games have been doing great on Facebook, and we're probably spending more on social and mobile now than we ever have as a company, and those are the platforms that will drive all of our growth as we go forward. So I'm almost done here. 2011, start of the year, the question was, do we want to go public or do we want to get bought? And we really took the path of going public. I spent a lot of time with bankers. We had built a pretty strong team. I took this picture of all the the piles of banker books that I had on my desk. My favorite, though, was the NASDAQ guys who came in, and they make their more elaborate pitch with the picture of the PopCap logo on Times Square. It's like, that's really good marketing. Makes you want to say, yes, sign me up. Spent a lot of time with bankers, and ultimately, as a lot of you may or may not know, we ended up going a different way. Earlier this year in July, Electronic Arts announced they had bought PopCap. This was the letter we sent, or we posted on the sort of commonly throughout the world, thanking EA humans for taking over PopCap. And it was really an interesting time. We actually, people have asked me sort of how things have changed. We're only about 3 months into the deal right now. And largely things are very much the same. We still call our own shots, we run our own things. I do have a boss for the first time in quite a long time, like 10 years. Maybe more than that, actually, 15. So that's a challenge for me. I'm not a particularly easy employee. I kind of gripe and moan a lot. But it's been fun, actually, working at EA. I was joking, EA recently hired a new CTO. And he was a guy who was working at Microsoft. And just before he started, he came over to our offices, and I was chatting with him. And I said, yeah, it's interesting for me. I've never worked at a company this big. I used to work at Apple, but Apple was smaller than this when I worked there in 1987. And 8,000 people. This is huge. And Rajat looked at me and he said, yeah, I've never worked for a company this small before. It's a different perspective. We are part of the large infrastructure now, and it's been fun. When we did the announcement, because Electronic Arts is public, we had to deal with all the sort of the public disclosure issues, of course. So we had to tell the company, and our offices are right down the street here in Belltown, and we actually had an event here in this conference center upstairs where we brought all the employees over just as the market closed, and we had told them what was going on, brought them over here for an event. So I got to sort of lock everyone in this room, and we told them what was happening, and then I had to go away and deal with some of the EA investors, so we had a bunch of investor calls. So I had about an hour's time where the folks at PopCap had to kind of sit in a room and entertain themselves, and a couple of founders were there, of course, and they were trying to talk people through it and do that. But one of the things that they did during this thing was to sort of write question cards for us to take over later, which I'll show you in a second. But really, I forgot my message here on all this, my lesson, is that no matter what the investors will tell you, an exit is not an exit. An exit is really the beginning of something new. People sort of have asked me a lot now what it's like being part of EA, and we really see this as a brand new beginning. All the founders are still at PopCap. Most of my exec team is largely, pretty much everybody there is still there and pretty excited about this. We see this as a better way to take the company forward. Now, your investors may see an exit as an exit, and that's all fine for them, but when you're an entrepreneur, your company keeps going, and if you go public, if you sell it, whatever it is, you aren't done yet. And if you think you are, I think you're probably looking at things too narrowly. A lot of people love to be serial entrepreneurs, but if you're building a great company and building a great legacy, I think a lot of it depends on how well you want to stick with it. So anyway, we were trapped up. I'll go back to the story now. Trapped up in the room upstairs, and the folks wrote comment cards, and these are the actual cards. I only edited maybe half a dozen of them out because they were either hitting confidential stuff. So I'll just leave these up here while we talk, and I can take questions, even though I think we're running late. So questions, comments, anything? Come on, someone else have a question? No? I'm just going to read the questions from the PopCap team. It's nice having artists because they do funny stuff. Oh, yeah. Was anybody really upset? Lots of people were upset. There were people crying when they walked over here. I mean, it was a tough day because everyone, we, like a lot of small companies, have all grown up together. You feel this great affiliation with what you do. We identify with their work. We all are very passionate about it. And I think people were all, change is scary. So at the end of the day, we didn't have any people, I won't say any, a couple people have left, but not many. I mean, out of 550 people, we have not had a significant number of people who have left because of it. Mostly because people's jobs haven't changed. Ask me in 6 months, and we can have this discussion again. But we really, so far, so good. And part of it's because I've had incredible support from EA. John Riccatello, is the CEO, has been he's been to the Seattle offices like 3 times since it closed. He's been to my studios in Dublin. He takes a huge interest in this, and that support has really helped. It sort of filters out through his organization. I credit his leadership a lot for that. Yeah.
How do you find your talent? And then also, that's kind of a two-part question. Like, how do you find your talent? And I'm assuming that's changing a bit as you're growing. And then also, do you build in some sort of stakeholder element for the people that actually work with you, and how do you do that?
So the question was about talent acquisition. It's the hard. You'll hear that it's the hardest thing you do as an entrepreneur, and I will absolutely agree with that. It's finding people is really hard. The good thing about being old and having lived here a long time is that I could hire a lot of people I knew. So I stacked PopCap senior people early on with folks I'd worked with in various jobs, and have not regretted that. That's always been a good thing for me. You just slog through it. I don't think you can work with lots of outside firms and outside, even internal HR teams to help you staff. But ultimately, I really believe that all the managers are responsible for their own hiring. It's why we've never been able to grow at the kind of astronomic pace that you've seen some of the startups, the 1,000 people in a year kind of pace, because I make all my managers do the work to interview and hire. And that's a natural governor kind of on what you can do. But I think it's really important because all the business truisms, your people are really what you're all about. And as soon as you start letting B players infiltrate your team, it's hard to get them out, ever. And the next question was sort of what are the incentive programs? We've always given a lot of stock to people. Stock option plans are messy and icky and have all these new legal complications that I wish didn't exist. But basically, keeping people well compensated has always been a big piece of what we do. But creating a great work environment and a great culture has also been important. We've had a workforce culture, a person in charge of workforce culture at PopCap for years. And when my HR person suggested we do that, I thought she was crazy. And it turned out I was wrong on that one. And she has helped us emphasize that and grow the culture of PopCap, because that is also what people value. Once people retreat to talking about salary, it's usually because there's something else wrong. Last question, sorry.
Can you talk a little bit about the marketing and advertising that helps you achieve that?
Talk about marketing and advertising. Well, I'm a marketing guy, and we didn't really even have a marketing department for years. So at PopCap, we always made the games sell themselves. And when you're a product-driven company, you have to lead with the products. As we've grown, we've built an awesome marketing department. But they're pretty low-key as marketing departments go. We spend a small percentage of marketing, a small percentage of our revenues on sales and marketing, but that's more of a factor of our industry. When your product is a try-and-buy product, you have to let the product do the work, and so you're encouraging trial. And so it's more in that kind of, more like the Web 2.0 stuff, or 3.0, whatever version of the web we're up to these days, where you're in a direct-to-consumer model, and you have to sort of find new ways to engage people, and we've had to do that all along. We've always monetized 2 or 3% of our audience, and that's kind of how we live in this business. But I'm not sure that's a good rule of thumb. So.
That was fantastic. Thank you.